Hello. Hi, everybody. All right, we're going to get started with our next talk here. We have Mikhail. He's automation engineer from Parallels and also a contributor to Vagrant, Packer, Chef, as well as a maintainer of the Parallels plugin for Vagrant. So, everyone, welcome Mikhail.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Mikhail Zholobov. I'm working at Parallels in internal infrastructure team. We are involved in the process of supporting our internal infrastructure, and also we maintain our private cloud, and we actively use HashiCorp products such as Packer, Atlas, and Vagrant in particular. And moreover, for Vagrant, we have developed our own provider for our main product produced by our company, the Parallels desktop for Mac. In few words, this is a desktop virtualization system for Mac computers, allowing you to run virtual machines on Macs. So our product, Parallels Desktop, is widely used for Windows virtualization. Most of our customers actually use that for Windows use cases, but since this is a full virtualization, it could be used for any Guest operating system. And in particular, we use it with Vagrant for running Linux system. So, and this is the main reason why I'm here today. Our Parallels provider for Vagrant this is the plugin which we are created in order to make it possible for our users to use Vagrant with Parallels Desktop. So today we will explore how the Vagrant plugin model is designed in a nutshell. And I also share with you my own experience, and I will show you how we have created our provider and what experience we have gained on this way. So before we start, I'd like to ask you guys, how many of you have ever contributed to Vagrant or any Vagrant plugin? Put your hands up. Wow, that's cool, actually. So you probably know, and if you have at least looked to the Vagrant source code, you know that actually Vagrant world is plugin-centric. I mean, most of basic features are implemented as built-in plugins, right? Actually, even those basic stuff like commands, for example, Vagrant up, reload, provision, destroy, even those commands are implemented as plugins. Of course, they are included to the Vagrant source code. They are bundled with Vagrant, but inside they are implemented as plugins. So both of internal and external plugins, which could be installed from the outside, they are using the same API. And this is really cool. This system allows us to create a lot of awesome third-party plugins. It's really easy to extend the basic Vagrant functionality. At this day, we know that Vagrant exists for 6 years already. So currently, we can use Vagrant with a lot of different virtualization systems and cloud providers. We can run virtual machines in KVM. We can manage LXC containers. We can also use Vagrant in order to manage virtual environments in cloud providers such as AWS, DigitalOcean, Google Compute Engine, and so on. And there are also a lot of useful plugins available on the GitHub, the open source community, which just make our Vagrant experience easier. Such plugins like Vagrant Omnibus, Sahara, Landrush, Vagrant Cashier, and so on. So I really like Vagrant plugin model. I'm absolutely sure that this is very well designed. And let me show you how it is designed in the nutshell. This is really simplified picture. I have displayed there all available features and functionalities on the right side as built-in plugins and external ones. And all remaining stuff, like all internal interfaces in the Vagrant, are displayed in the left side. I've called it as Vagrant Core. And I have separated here the plugin registry. This is the thing which could be considered as some kind of interface for all available features in Vagrant, which includes built-in plugins, all built-in functionality, and external functionality which you can install with third-party plugins from the outside. So actually, plugin registry plays a role of maybe proxy or interface between different plugins and between some plugin and Vagrant core. I think it will be pretty easier to display on the concrete example. So let's take a look what actually happens when you run the Vagrant app command in your terminal. Frankly speaking, when you run that command, of course, at the first time, Vagrant tries to parse what arguments you have specified in the command. In our simple example, we have only one argument, this is up, which is considered by Vagrant as some command which could be executed in the Vagrant. So on this first step, Vagrant sees, okay, seems like some command named up should be executed here. And it requests plugin registry, please provide me an implementation of that command, how it's working. And the plugin registry responds with a sufficient class, because we know that this is a built-in command, so no third-party plugin is required for that. So Vagrant have figured out that app command is going to create some new virtual machine or to start existing virtual machine. That's why we should to parse the Vagrant file, the main configuration file for Vagrant. And at this step, on the second step, let's assume that we have specified, we have created Vagrant file in our working directory. So the Vagrant tries to parse that Vagrant file. And it also uses a plugin model for that in order to parse each configuration option and each block we have specified in our Vagrant file. For example, if we have specified some custom options there, the Vagrant will request plugin registry again to provide the implementation of sufficient config component provided by plugin model. So, and then we have figured out that some new virtual machine should be created, and here is the way how it should be created, I mean the configuration specified in Vagrant file. So at the third step, Vagrant tries to communicate with some virtualization system, and the provider component is responsible for that. So we see that some action named up should be run inside, and Vagrant looks up all available providers in our Vagrant installation. So it's also provided by plugin registry. Plugin registry knows everything about all available features and functionalities available on our machine. So let's assume that we are working with a default provider VirtualBox, for example. So at this step, Vagrant requests the implementation of provider component named VirtualBox. Okay, since it's integrated plugin, it's available in Vagrant from out of box, so it works fine. It configures our virtual machine, it starts it. We are waiting for some time until our virtual machine became available by SSH, and as soon as it's ready, Vagrant tries to connect inside by SSH and tries to configure virtual machine by some way. For example, you know that there is very useful feature in Vagrant as synced folders. Some directory on our host machine should be shared with our concrete virtual machine. And let's assume that we have that default configuration. And in this step, Vagrant tries to figure out how that concrete directory should be mounted in our virtual machine. It connects there, it tries to understand what exactly Guest operating system is running inside. Is it Linux? What kind of Linux? What distribution? Is it Windows or Mac OS 10? And it makes sense because here we should understand what command we should use in order to mount that concrete VirtualBox shared folder. And this is provided by Guest capability component. And finally, let's assume that we have specified some provision section in our Vagrant file. You know, it's really widely used feature. You can use whatever provisioner you want, Shell, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, SaltStack, whatever. All they are implemented in the Vagrant out of box. So at this step, Vagrant again requests plugin registry to provide the implementation of concrete provisioner, to provide the sufficient provisioner component from plugin model. So as we see, all the steps are related to the communication with plugin registry. No one plugin requests some other plugin directly. All communication is proceeded through the plugin registry. So let's take a look how the Vagrant plugin model is designed and what are components available in the Vagrant plugin model. So in the current version number 2 of Vagrant plugin API, there are 12 components available for you as potential plugin developers. So you can use that components as some kind of building blocks in order to build your custom plugin. For example, if you are interested to extend the basic Vagrant functionality and add some new, let's say, command, Vagrant make a magic, it means that you will have to implement the command component, name it make a magic. Or, for example, if you would like to add a support of some new Gwest operating system, some new hipster Linux distribution. So you will have to implement the sufficient Gwest component and Gwest capability component. And finally, if you are cool enough and would like to make it possible to use Vagrant with some new virtualization system or with some cloud provider, you will have to implement the provider and provider capability components. So it looks pretty easy. As Mitchell have said before and on the opening keynote, they are implemented different components and you can mix any of them in order to create your custom plugin. So before, if you would like to create your custom provider, before you start, of course, I'd like to mention some pretty obvious thing, like you know that Vagrant is written in Ruby, so of course you should be familiar with Ruby. I think basic knowledge will be absolutely enough because you should just know how to work with such tools like Gem, Bundler, and Rake, and that's all. If you are already a Ruby guy, that's cool. You are free to use your favorite patterns and frameworks, whatever you have used to use. So, for example, if you prefer test-driven development, behavior-driven development, or whatever driver development, use your favorite pattern because actually each third-party plugin for Vagrant is a simple Ruby package, a simple Ruby gem. It means that you shouldn't take care about what directory layout you should create, how to package your plugin, how to distribute it, where you should to publish, and so on. Just build your gem, push it to the official repository, to the rubygems.org website, and that's all. Your potential users will be able to use your plugin and install it just using a well-known command, Vagrant plugin install, and your gem name, and that's all. So this is simple Ruby gem. And of course, as a common Ruby project, you probably will want to use unit tests and some spec frameworks like AirSpec, Minitest, Cucumber, and so on. But I'd like to point your attention on very useful gem, name it vagrant-spec. This is gem created by Mitchell Hashimoto. Originally, it was been created for testing Vagrant, but it could be used by you as plugin developers for testing your custom provider. This gem provides very useful matchers and examples for unit tests, for specification, and also, which is more important, it provides a very useful interface for acceptance testing. Using the only one configuration file with a specified list of tests you would like to run, you can run acceptance test through all available and all specified features of Vagrant and to test the compatibility between your plugin and some other plugin, or between your plugin and some concrete Vagrant version. Or, like in our example, we actively use that gem in order to test the compatibility between our provider and some concrete version of our virtualization system. So this gem is really useful for providers in particular. And the last thing before you start to create your plugin, I'd like to tell you please check out the list of available plugins. Probably, maybe somebody have already initiated something looks similar to your idea. Actually, Vagrant exists for 6 years already, and at this day we have huge amount of plugins available for Vagrant. Actually, we have also passed through that because 2 years ago, when we have decided to create our provider for Parallels Desktop, we have found that some folks from Vagrant community have already initiated the repository named vagrant-parallels. Of course, not all features have been implemented, and this repository was on very early stage. But anyway, we have joined that community, we have contributed there, and after some time we have adopted that repository. So currently, this is our repo, our project, officially supported by Parallels and provided by Parallels to its customers. So let's go to the second part. Let's take a look what actually we have implemented in our plugin and how we did it. So our plugin, name it as Vagrant Parallels Provider or Parallels Provider for Vagrant. But actually, we have implemented not only provider component, as I said before. We have also implemented guest capability, provider capability components, synced folder component, and the config component. So let's take a look on each of them in more details. So the provider component, of course, this is the most complicated component in our plugin. Actually, in few words, provider could be considered as some kind of interface on the top of your virtualization system, which we are working on. In our particular case, when we have just started to work with that plugin, we have decided, oh, look, we have our command line interface for Parallels Desktop. We have some command line utilities. So it seems like the only we should do is just to wrap that comments of our command line in the Ruby methods. And this should be enough. So yeah, partially it is so. And we have done that. But when we have started to work with it, we have noticed that not all features of Parallels Desktop are available in our command line utility. And some commands have some issues or bugs, you know. By the way, this is a good example how the Vagrant and Vagrant community and that use case of using Vagrant and Linux OS systems helped our company to improve that product, to improve Parallels Desktop in order to be closer to Linux users and to Vagrant users. So, of course, we have fixed our bugs, we have improved our command line interface, but it also means that after some time, with the newer and newer releases of Parallels Desktop for Mac, we have got a situation when our command line interface is really different for each major versions of Parallels Desktop. So it means that we have to implement pretty complicated driver, which is the bunch of Ruby methods on the top of command line utilities. So we have to support backward compatibility with different versions, and we also have to support to prepare our provider for upcoming versions of our product. It also means that if you will decide to create your custom provider, you should also put your attention on that fact. You should support different versions, and it could be pretty complicated. And the next thing here is the box format. It's not so hard to create your custom box format. You know that boxes in the Vagrant are absolutely provider specific. So it means if you are creating your provider, you should provide a way and instructions how to build boxes for your provider. Otherwise, nobody will be able to use your provider. When we have started, we have built just 2 boxes for Ubuntu and CentOS Linux. But after 2 years, on this day, we have a pretty big amount of supported boxes for Parallels. We are not building them manually. We use Packer for that. We distribute it through our CDN, and we publish them on Atlas. So if you are working with on some provider, be ready that you will have to support your boxes, to maintain them, to build them, to publish them, and distribute them to your users. So let's go to the next component, provider capability component. It looks similar with provider, but actually this is just a common named interface for your provider. For example, when we have just started with our provider, we have noticed that some useful feature in Vagrant have been released. I mean, Vagrant Share feature. Probably you know that this feature allows you to provide a remote access to your virtual machine from the external network, from the internet or whatever. It works through some kind of proxies, but it doesn't matter. In our particular case, when we have tried that feature with VirtualBox Provider, it works fine. When we have just run it with Parallels Desktop, it doesn't work at all. And pretty designed error message is displayed in our terminal. So what's the reason? Vagrant Share feature, being a basic feature of Vagrant, expects that your provider, and our as well, are implementing some common named method with a name public_address. This is pretty simple method. It just should to provide an IP address of your virtual machine. But you have to implement that method in order to make available for a user to use that feature with your provider. As soon as we have implemented that, Vagrant Share feature became working fine with us. So again, provider capability is just a common named method which other plugins or other functionalities expects to see in your provider. It's not required. You can skip that. But it means that some features or some integrations with a different system could not be worked with your provider. So the next component we have implemented in our plugin is synced folder component. As I've said before, it's really widely used feature of Vagrant. But for example, if you are working with some cloud provider, you don't have a big choice in the way to share your directory. I don't remember exactly, but maybe only rsync mechanism is available for cloud virtual environments. But if you are working with local providers like VirtualBox, VMware, or Parallels Desktop, their vendors are totally recommend you to use their native mechanisms for synced folders. In our particular case, we also have Parallels specific shared folders which are designed to use for sharing directories with virtual machines running in Parallels Desktop. So it's really simple component for Vagrant because it's just 2 or 3 methods, meaning that what commands should be used in order to share that concrete directory with that virtual machine, and that's all. We have implemented that in our plugin as well, but we also have some bad experience with that because as soon as we have released that, we have noticed that it doesn't work fine with Linux operating system, and in particular with Git in Linux. Yep, but this is yet another good example how the Vagrant use case have helped Parallels company to find bugs in your products and fix them. We have fixed that problems already, so Parallels shared folders are already ready to use. So this is how the Vagrant helps to improve products. So the next component we have implemented in our plugin is the guest capability. It sounds similar with provider capability, and it actually is. As I said before, provider capability is some interface for communicating, which is designed for other components or other features will be communicate with your plugin. So this is an interface which you are using for communication with other features. So the guest capability component is absolutely the same, but it's not provider specific, but it is guest specific. For example, as I've said before, we have implemented synced folders. We have made possible for our users to use parallel shared folders, but we also have to tell Vagrant how it should mount that shared folders in each supported Guest operating system. For example, if shared folder is exported to that concrete virtual machine, we have implement the mechanism to mount it in Windows, in Linux, and OS X Guest operating system. So it means that we have to implement 3 Guest capability components with the same name, some mount parallel shared folders, but oriented to provide an appropriate commands for mounting parallel shared folders on each Guest operating system. And also, we have implemented the same mechanism for updating Parallels tools. This is Guest tool, some kind of Guest additions for concrete Guest operating system. And it also Guest specific because we should use different approaches for doing that on different Guest operating systems. So this is Guest capability is all about. And the final component we have done in our plugin is the config component. This is a really widely used component. I think maybe 90% of all available third-party plugins for Vagrant are actually use that component and implement it in their source code. Because this is the only way how you can configure, to provide your users to configure your plugin. You shouldn't take care about how to manage configuration file, what language you should use there, where to place your configuration, and so on. Vagrant has only one entry point for configuration, and it is the Vagrant file. So if you would like to provide some custom options for Vagrant file, it means that you have to implement config component and specify there which options you would like to provide for your plugin. In our particular case, we have implemented that component, and in order to make it possible for our users to configure their virtual machines in details using the command line interface, command line commands. And also, we have implemented some flags for our features, like feature use linked clone. Well, by the way, it's a really cool feature allowing to create copy on write clones instead of full cloning. And also, you can use custom options in order to switch on off Parallels tools auto update. It's also useful for those who are going to keep their Parallels tools up to date in the Guest VM. So, to summarize our experience, I'd like to point your attention on the first point. Provider actually is the most complicated component in the Vagrant, because actually this is the main interface for communicating with virtualization system or with cloud provider. It means that if you are working with some third-party virtualization system, if you are providing some plugin for that, you have to take care about compatibility with concrete version of your virtualization system. In our particular case, actually, we are spending pretty much time and effort on the issues which are related not only to our provider itself, not only to the Vagrant plugin, but we have also received issues which are related to the Parallels desktop itself. If you would like, if you will take a look at our issue tracker on the GitHub, you will see that there are pretty much issues and questions which are related to Parallels desktop. So if you are working with that, or if you are creating your custom provider, please be ready that you will have to answer on such kind of questions to your users. And finally, don't forget about acceptance testing, especially for provider development. As I said before, there is a very useful gem, vagrant-spec, which allows you to run acceptance tests for your provider. So for providers, it's really important in particular because you should test the compatibility with each version of backend virtualization system you are using. So actually, in Parallels, we are running acceptance test with Vagrant-spec in order to test the compatibility with all versions of Parallels Desktop. And even more, we test our internal builds of Parallels Desktop just in order to figure out have we broken something with compatibility with Vagrant or not. So, and as useful links, I'd like to provide, as you have mentioned, as you have noticed, I haven't mentioned any Ruby code right now. I don't think that it's really useful for the second day of HashiCorp. It's pretty boring, I think. So if you are really interested on the source code, and if you would like to take a look how we have created our provider in the Ruby code, feel free to refer to our repository on the GitHub. So there you will find how we have implemented each component on Ruby. And also, don't hesitate to refer to the list of available Vagrant plugins. There you will find a huge amount of plugins available for Vagrant, and there are available all components which I have mentioned in the beginning. And of course, read this funny manual. Basics of Vagrant plugin development is a page on the official documentation of Vagrant. There is a pretty clear and short examples of how you should to implement each component in Ruby. So, seems like that's all from me on today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I also ready to answer on your questions after the talk. If you have any questions related to Parallels Desktop, to the Vagrant integration, or whatever related to Parallels overall, so feel free to ask me. I also ready to talk about that. So, thank you.